Pack Square Park, 9:47 on a Friday morning. Red maple leaves drifted across the brick walkway. Audrey Lockhart sat in her wheelchair beside the fountain. Her hand clenched at her chest, her fingers slipped from the rim, and her head tipped forward. A woman screamed for 911. The crowd stood frozen. A man in a faded jacket cut through them, dropped to his knees, checked her pulse, and started compressions with the precision of 1,000 prior times. Someone shoved an AED toward him. He pressed the pads down without reading the diagram. "Stand clear," he said. The shock hit. Her body jolted once and went still. The man bent his ear to her mouth, then locked his hands on her sternum and started again. 2 minutes. 3. Sirens climbed Biltmore Avenue from the south. He did not look up. The crowd had stepped back into a wide ring, and inside that ring there was only the rhythm of his palms and the quiet count under his breath. The ambulance pulled onto the grass at 6 minutes flat. The paramedic swung down with a stretcher, and the man in the faded jacket spoke before either of them asked. V-fib on arrival. 2 shocks delivered, second one converted. Estimated downtime, 28 minutes when I got to her, Rosk achieved at minute 4. Pulse is thready but present. She's been out about 11 minutes total. The lead EMT, a heavy-shouldered man named Dwyer, blinked at him. "You medical?" "Used to be." Dwyer wanted to ask another question. The man was already standing, brushing leaves from his knees. He stepped backward into the crowd, turned once toward Audrey, and walked away across the brick. By the time the patrol car arrived, no one could agree on what he looked like. At Mission Hospital Asheville, Audrey woke in the ICU at 3 in the afternoon. The fluorescent panel above her bed buzzed. Helen Vasquez was sitting in the chair by the window, her hands folded, her face the color of paper. A young attending came in and explained, in the voice doctors used for the very lucky and the very rich, that 90 more seconds without compressions and she would have lost her brain. The man in the park had done something most ER physicians could not have done in those conditions. Audrey did not answer. She looked at the ceiling tile for a long time. Then she said, "Was there a camera?" "There's a city camera on the corner of College Street." She closed her eyes. Across town, Daniel Hartwell parked his pickup at the curb of Briarwood Early Learning Center and signed his daughter out. His hands were still shaking, and it was not from shock. It was from the thing he thought he had buried 4 years ago, which had risen up under his palms in a public park and refused to be put back down. Lily was 5. She had her mother's brown curls and a stuffed bear named Mr. Bumble that she dragged everywhere by one ear. In the truck she looked at her father. "Daddy, why are your hands shaking?" "Just cold, sweetheart." That night, after she was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table and slid open the bottom drawer. Inside was a wooden box. He set it on the table and lifted the lid. There was a hospital ID badge with his face on it, 4 years younger. There was a photograph of a woman with pale hair, on a porch in summer. There was a folded square of paper in his own handwriting, 2 words, "Never again." He looked at the box for a long time. Then he closed the lid. He did not put it back. Across the city, in a quiet hospital room, Audrey Lockhart lay awake and watched the IV count out the minutes she had not been given. Audrey discharged herself after 3 days. Her doctor argued. Helen argued. She rolled past both of them and into the back of her car and told the driver to take her to the office. Lockhart Biomedical occupied a renovated brick building on Biltmore Avenue. From her desk on the 4th floor she could see the south end of Pack Square. She had her assistant pull every angle of city footage from the morning of the incident, and she sat through 40 minutes of grainy video until she found the figure in the faded jacket. The face was always angled away, what the camera caught clearly was the hands. She watched the hands for a long time. Then she called a private investigator and gave him 3 things, the footage, a still of the jacket, and a photograph of the hands. She told him she needed a name in 2 days. Helen came in at the end of the afternoon with a tray of tea, saw the still on the screen, and stopped walking. The cup rattled against the saucer. "You all right?" "Long shift," Helen said. She set the tray down and left. 48 hours later the investigator emailed a single page. Daniel Hartwell, 41, woodworker at Briarwood Workshop in West Asheville, widower. 1 daughter, age 5, no criminal record. No medical license listed in any state directory. Audrey read the page twice. Then she drove herself across town in the modified SUV with the hand controls. Briarwood Workshop was a converted barn off Haywood Road. The smell of cedar hit her at the threshold. Daniel was at the back, sanding an oak board, sleeves rolled. He looked up when the door opened. He did not pretend to be surprised. "Mom. Mr. Hartwell." He set down the sanding block. She rolled toward him and stopped at a polite distance. "I came to say thank you." "You don't need to." "I do." He looked at the floor. "I just did what anyone would have done." "No. You did not." She drew an envelope from her chair pocket and placed it on the bench. He looked at it without picking it up. The edge of a check showed. 5 zeros. "I don't take money for that," he said. "It's not for that. It's for whatever you need." He pushed it back across the wood. "I don't take money for that." She did not argue. She nodded once, turned the chair, and rolled toward the door. On the wall beside the door, half hidden behind a coat hook, was a small framed photograph. A younger Daniel, in a white coat, beside a fair-haired woman in scrubs. Behind them, on a corridor wall, the letters were partially visible: Mission Hospital Charlotte, Cardiology Department. Audrey did not stop. Her eyes caught it, and held it, all the way out to the parking lot. In the SUV, before she started the engine, she dialed Helen. "Pull a list. Every cardiologist who worked at Mission Hospital Charlotte before 2020. Especially anyone named Daniel." She hung up before Helen could answer. In the back office at the Kenilworth house, Helen sat down at the kitchen table and put her hands flat on the wood. She had been at Mission Charlotte for 12 years. She had been in the operating room the day Daniel Hartwell's wife coded on his table. And years before that, she had been in another room the day a young fellow named Daniel Hartwell signed a prognosis for a patient called A. Lockhart. She had walked into Audrey's life 6 months after the accident. For 9 years she had kept her silence. Helen sat at the table for a long time. A week later, Audrey came back to Briarwood. She did not bring an envelope. She did not bring her assistant. She had washed her hair and put on the gray cashmere her sister had sent her 2 Christmases ago. "There's a coffee shop on Battery Park Avenue," she said from the doorway. "It has a ramp. I'd like you to come with me." Daniel looked at the board he was sanding for a long moment. Then he set the block down and reached for his jacket. "I'll have to bring my daughter. She's out of school today." "That's fine." Lily was in the truck. She climbed into the back of Audrey's SUV with the careful seriousness of a child meeting royalty, and she stared at the wheelchair in the cargo space the entire drive. The Battery Park Cafe smelled of cinnamon. Audrey rolled to a corner table by the window. The owner, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and a flour-dusted apron, came out from behind the counter and held the door for them without making a show of it. Daniel set Lily up with hot chocolate and a placemat with crayons. The girl studied Audrey's chair for 30 seconds, then looked up, her face open as a window. "Are your legs broken?" Daniel's coffee paused halfway to his mouth. Audrey did not flinch. She had been asked the question by many adults, none of whom had asked it kindly, and never once by a child. "Yes, sweetheart. They've been broken for a long time." Lily considered this with the gravity of a small judge. Then she pulled out a brown bear with a chewed ear. "His name is Mr. Bumble. He helps when things hurt." Audrey's hand closed around the bear's paw. She did not laugh. She did not cry. She looked at Daniel for a long moment, and Daniel looked back, and what passed between them was not quite anything yet. Lily went back to her crayons. She drew a red bird with a black mask. "Cardinal," she announced. "Daddy says they come in winter." Audrey and Daniel talked. The weather first, then the workshop, then, with care on both sides, the company. He asked what Lockhart Biomedical built. She told him: cardiac monitors, defibrillators, a new line of public access AEDs. "You worked in medicine, didn't you?" "Long time ago." She did not press. She watched his hands curl around the cup and she thought of those same hands at the fountain. She thought, too, of how rarely men with hands like that ended up in places like this, sanding oak in a converted barn. There was a story behind it. She was not going to ask for it today. He told her, briefly, about the workshop. He had bought it 3 years ago from a retiring carpenter named Briarwood, and had kept the name because the word felt like a place a person could hide. He worked alone. The orders came by word of mouth. When they stood to leave, she said, "I'd like you to consult on the AED program. Technical Advisory Board. 6 meetings a year. We're redesigning the platform, and I need someone on the panel who knows what it feels like to use one." He was quiet for a long time. "I'll think about it." That night, after Lily was asleep, he opened the wooden box. He took out the hospital ID. He set it on the table beside his coffee. He looked at his own younger face for an hour without moving. He accepted by email, 3 sentences, on a Tuesday morning. The first technical advisory meeting was held the following week in the 4th-floor conference room. 6 engineers, 2 physicians from Mission, the chief financial officer, and Marcus Renfield. Marcus was Audrey's cousin on her mother's side, the chief operating officer, and the man who had run the day-to-day for the 11 months following her hospitalization in 2017. Gray suit, careful smile. The eyes did not match the smile. "Mr. Hartwell," Marcus said. "Your file says woodworker. What credentials are we relying on, exactly?" Audrey said nothing. She had taken the head of the table and folded her hands on the agenda packet. She was watching. Daniel looked across the polished wood. "Field experience. Field experience. Yes. Could you elaborate?" "I've used the equipment your team is redesigning. In conditions your team will never test for." Marcus let the silence hold. Then he slid a printout across the table. "The new AED," he said, "could be brought in 20% under current production cost. The savings came primarily from a smaller battery pack, which simulation suggested would handle 96% of cardiac events as effectively as the current model." Daniel read the page. "Your simulation runs on a 30-minute window. Standard testing. VFib past minute 15 needs more shocks. Your smaller battery delivers 4. You'll save $80 per unit. You'll trade about 4% survival on prolonged cases." The room went still. Marcus smiled thinly. "That's an emotional calculation. That's a calculation I made with my hands once," Daniel said. "In Pack Square Park." No one moved. The CFO looked at his pen. One of the engineers, a young woman named Pham, opened her laptop and pulled the survival data without being asked. She read the numbers from the last 6 months of public deployments. Daniel was within half a point of the published figure. Marcus tried to recover. He spoke for another 2 minutes about cost ratios and Tier 2 markets. Daniel let him finish. Then Daniel said, evenly, that the smaller battery pack would still be appropriate for indoor commercial deployments where average response time was under 8 minutes, and that the current pack should remain standard for outdoor public access placements. He suggested a 2-tier product line. The CFO wrote it down. 2 of the engineers nodded. Audrey watched him through this without expression. He had defended his position without naming the credential that would have ended the argument. He had also, without being asked, given Marcus a way to keep some of his cost savings. She filed both observations away. She adjourned the meeting 20 minutes later. Marcus followed her into her office. "He's manipulating you. You're emotionally compromised." Marcus, out. Audrey, out. He went. That night, in his condo on Town Mountain, Marcus poured a finger of bourbon and dialed a private investigator. Not the one Audrey used. He did not ask the man to find Daniel Hartwell. He asked him to find what Daniel Hartwell was hiding. Audrey and Daniel rode the elevator down at 6:15. The car was empty. The mirrored panel showed her chair and his shoulder, the slight space between them. "Thank you for not yielding," she said. "I don't yield well, not when there's a life on the table." "You also gave him a way out." "Yes. Why?" "Because the goal isn't to win the argument. The goal is the right device in the right place." She nodded once. The doors opened. They parted at the sidewalk without touching. She invited him to the house 10 days later. The Kenilworth property was a single-story brick set against a hillside, the entire thing built or rebuilt for the chair. Wide hallways, lever handles, a lowered island. From the back terrace the Blue Ridge ran in long blue waves toward Tennessee. The official reason was the AED firmware specification. The actual reason was simpler than that, and she did not say it. He came at 6. He brought Lily because he had no one to leave her with. Helen Vasquez was already there, a roast in the oven, her face composed and her eyes catching at Daniel 3 or 4 times before he had even taken off his coat. Lily walked across the great room as if she had been there before. She stopped at Audrey's chair, looked up at her face, then at the chair, and without asking, climbed into Audrey's lap and settled her cheek against the cashmere sweater. Audrey's body went still. For 2 seconds she did not breathe. Then her hand came up and rested on the small back, lightly, as if testing whether the child were real. No one had been in her lap in 9 years. She did not cry. The wet stayed inside her eyes. Daniel saw it, and looked away to give her the privacy of it. They ate at the lowered table. Helen served and watched and said almost nothing. Lily ate 2 helpings of carrots and asked Audrey if her chair could go fast. Audrey said yes. Helen, in the kitchen, set a glass down too hard and pretended she had not. Lily fell asleep on the couch around 8, Mr. Bumble pressed against her face. Audrey watched from the doorway. She had not seen anyone tuck a child in inside this house in 9 years. She and Daniel took mugs of coffee out to the terrace and sat side by side in the dark while the wind came up off the mountains. For a long time neither spoke. The Blue Ridge held the last of the light along its highest spine, then let it go. Audrey had grown up looking at this exact horizon from a smaller house, before her parents had been killed in the same year and the company had become the only thing she had left. She had never told anyone that. She did not tell him now. But she felt the edge of it loosen. "Your wife," Audrey said finally. "How did she die?" He took a long breath. "On an operating table. Mine." She did not say "I'm sorry." She put her hand on top of his where it rested on the arm of his chair, 3 seconds. Then she drew it back. "I haven't talked about her in 4 years, he said. "You don't have to talk about her now. I know." He carried Lily out at 9:30, and Audrey watched from the window until the truck's taillights disappeared. In the kitchen, Helen was wiping the counter. Audrey rolled in. "Helen." "Yes. You knew him." Helen did not look up. "Did he ever read your MRI?" Helen asked. Audrey looked at her. "What?" Helen shook her head. "I shouldn't have said that." "Forget it." She walked out and shut her door, and Audrey sat in the dark of the kitchen for a long time, the warmth of his hand still ghost-printed on hers. She did not call Helen back. She did not sleep that night. In the morning, before the sun was up, she rolled into her home office, woke the laptop, and opened the contact directory of the Medical Records Department at Mission Hospital Charlotte. As CEO of one of the hospital's largest device partners, she had a name and a direct line. By 11 that morning, a sealed PDF arrived in her secure inbox, her own file from 2017. 146 pages. Trauma intake. Surgical note. Imaging. Specialist consults. Final disposition. She scrolled to the last page first, the prognosis, the document that had told her, in language meant to be kind, that she would not walk again. Patient unlikely to regain ambulatory function. Recommend long-term rehabilitation and adaptive equipment. Signed, Robert Eston, M.D., Department Chair. Co-signed, Daniel Hartwell, M.D., Interventional Cardiology Fellow. She read the signature 3 times. The man who had brought her back to life on a brick walkway in Pack Square Park was the same man whose name was on the document that had told her she would never stand again. She closed the laptop. She did not move for a long time. A soft knock at the door. Helen came in without waiting. She had a folded paper. She did not turn on the light. "You read the file?" "Yes. I knew you would." Helen sat in the chair across from the desk. 9 years ago, I worked the cardiac floor at Mission Charlotte. I was the night nurse on your post-op week. Daniel Hartwell was the youngest fellow on the team. He was 32. He had been arguing with Dr. Eston for 3 days about your case. Audrey said nothing. There was a decompression procedure being trialed at Johns Hopkins for incomplete spinal injuries with your imaging profile. Experimental. Maybe 30% chance of partial recovery. Eston said the protocol wasn't approved at Mission. He told Daniel to co-sign because fellows always co-signed. Helen unfolded the paper and slid it across the desk. The day Daniel signed the official report, he wrote this in the secondary file. The secondary file is administrative. It gets pulled when a chart is closed. This page never made it to your discharge packet. The paper was a photocopy. The yellowing was uneven, the way old paper goes when it has been kept in a wallet for 9 years. The handwriting was clean and small. For the record, I dissented. I believe surgical intervention should have been attempted, D.H. He didn't win, Helen said. But he wrote it. And I kept it. I always thought, somewhere, you'd find out. Audrey held the paper a long time. Why didn't you tell me? Because he wasn't in your life. Until now. And you have a right to choose how you carry it. Audrey did not answer for a full minute. Then she picked up her phone and dialed Daniel. Tomorrow, she said when he answered. Come to the house. 6 o'clock. We need to talk. She hung up. Across town, in a different office, Marcus Renfield was looking at a different page. The investigator had pulled an old North Carolina Medical Board badge, Daniel Hartwell, Interventional Cardiology, license suspended on voluntary surrender, 2021. Marcus smiled. He drafted the email to the board on Sunday night, scheduled to send Monday at 6, subject. Urgent. Conflict of interest and leadership capacity. Daniel arrived at 6 the next evening. The truck was empty. Helen was at the back of the house with Lily, doing puzzles in the den, the door closed. Audrey met him at the open front door, rolled back to let him in, and led him to the kitchen. The photocopy was on the table, alone, waiting. She did not speak. She gestured to it. He saw it from 3 feet away. The color went out of his face in a long, quiet draw. He sat down without being asked. He picked up the page. He read his own handwriting for the first time in 9 years. His mouth moved, soundlessly, around the initials. He had written it on a Wednesday afternoon in March. He remembered now. Eston had left the office. The secondary file had been on the corner of the nurse's station. He had picked up a pen because the alternative was going home and looking at himself in a mirror. He had not believed, when he wrote it, that anyone would ever read it. He had written it so that one day, if asked whether he had agreed, he could open a drawer in his memory and answer honestly. He had forgotten he had done it. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't recognize you. Your name on the report was abbreviated. A. Lockhart. And I have spent 9 years trying to forget every patient I couldn't save. You did not fail to save me, Audrey said. You tried. You tried, and you were overruled. Audrey. Don't apologize for being overruled. Apologize for forgetting. He nodded, slowly. He did not look up. She felt the tears come for the first time in years. They were not angry tears. They were the tears of a woman who had spent 9 years believing that no one in that room had been on her side, and was learning, in this kitchen, that one of them had been. He slid out of the chair and went down on one knee beside hers. It was not the posture of a suitor. It was the posture of penance. If they had let me, he said, you might have walked out of that hospital. I have lived with that for 9 years without knowing I was living with it. She put her hand on his hand. She did not pull it back. For a long minute they stayed there, his knee on the tile, her hand on his. The kitchen clock ticked once across the silence. From the den at the back of the house came the distant murmur of Lily reciting numbers for Helen, counting puzzle pieces. I don't need you to stand up for me, she said at last. I need you to stand beside me. He looked up. Her phone buzzed on the table. She read it. Her face changed. She turned the phone toward him. A group message to the entire 11-member board, sent from Marcus Renfield, subject line. Urgent. Conflict of interest and leadership capacity. Attached, a scanned image of an old hospital badge with Daniel's face on it. Below, an emergency board meeting was called for 9 the next morning, to discuss whether the chief executive officer's recent decisions reflected a fitness to lead. Daniel read it. He set the phone down. Then I'll be there, he said. You don't have to. I do. I'm not going to let someone else sign the decision this time. She looked at him. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the wind had begun to move through the rhododendron. Okay, she said. The boardroom on the 4th floor of Lockhart Biomedical filled at 9 in the morning. 11 directors around the long walnut table. Marcus at the foot, Audrey at the head, the CFO and general counsel along the sides. The blinds were drawn against the autumn glare. Marcus stood. He had prepared slides. The first slide was Daniel Hartwell's old hospital badge, magnified. "This," Marcus said, "is the man our chief executive officer has placed on our technical advisory board. A physician who voluntarily surrendered his license. A man with no public record. His presence is, at minimum, a legal exposure, and at maximum, a sign that the chief executive officer's recent decisions are not being made with the clarity this company requires." He let it land. He clicked through 3 more slides. Risk. Reputation. Capacity. When he was done, he sat down. Audrey did not stand. She tapped a button on the console. The boardroom door opened. Daniel walked in. He took the open seat at the side. He did not look at Marcus. He looked at the 11 faces. "My name is Daniel Hartwell. I was an interventional cardiologist at Mission Hospital Charlotte. I voluntarily surrendered my license 4 years ago, after my wife died on my operating table. The death was not from an error. The death was from a complication that did not respond to intervention. I stopped operating because I could not, in good conscience, continue. I have not practiced medicine since. I am consulting with this company on engineering, at Miss Lockhart's request. Because 6 weeks ago I performed CPR on her in Pack Square Park." A board member leaned forward. "That was you." "That was me." Audrey spoke for the first time. "There is more. Mr. Hartwell, 9 years ago, was a fellow at Mission Hospital Charlotte. He was assigned to my case after my accident. He dissented in writing from the prognosis that told me I would not walk again. He did not win that argument. But he wrote it down. And he is sitting in this room today because I asked him to, and because he belongs here more than anyone Marcus Renfield has put on this board in the last 6 months. She turned to Marcus. "You have been moving against me for half a year. You thought I did not see it. I saw it. You will offer your resignation today, or I will walk this board through the full audit Deloitte completed on the operations division last week." Marcus opened his mouth. He closed it. The audit was real. He had not known she had it. He stood. He gathered his binder. "This is a mistake," he said. "It's a correction." The board called the vote. 9-2 in favor of the chief executive officer. Marcus walked out without speaking again. The 2 directors who had voted with him stayed in their seats and looked at the table. When the others had filed out, Audrey and Daniel were left alone. She rolled her chair around the corner of the table. She took his hand and laid it flat across her thigh, where the sensation was 30% of what it should have been, and she wanted his hand there anyway. "I thought I never needed anyone beside me. I was wrong." He covered her hand with his. 3 weeks later, Daniel was still at the workshop. He had not gone back to medicine. He had taken the AED clinical advisory role on a half-time contract, attending engineering reviews and writing the protocol documents that would ride inside every device Lockhart shipped. Audrey announced, in a small press release, she would not let her communications team dress up the launch of a new program funded out of her personal foundation. It was called the Descent Fund. It would underwrite experimental decompression procedures for spinal cord patients whose insurance had refused them, in cases where the attending physician of record had documented disagreement with the standard prognosis. The release went out on a Thursday. By Monday morning the foundation's inbox held more than 400 letters. Audrey read every one she had time for. She did not delegate that. She did not announce, publicly, that she had filed her own application. She told Daniel on a Saturday afternoon, in his truck, with Lily buckled in the back singing along to a song on the radio. He drove them up the Blue Ridge Parkway. Craggy Gardens had a paved overlook with a wheelchair-accessible ramp. The leaves were almost gone now, the air thin and clean. Lily ran ahead and back, pointing at every tree and asking what it was. Audrey, who had grown up in these mountains, named them. Sourwood. Yellow birch. Red oak. Mountain laurel. The girl listened with her whole face and repeated each name aloud and then forgot it the moment the next tree appeared. Daniel hung back a few steps and watched them. Audrey in the chair, Lily leaning against her arm, the two of them outlined against a valley that fell away in long blue layers toward Tennessee. His chest was warm in a way it had not been warm in 4 years. "Are you Daddy's friend now?" Lily asked. Audrey looked at Daniel. "I think so." "Is that all right? Then you can come to our house and have pancakes," Lily said. "Daddy makes them shaped like cardinals." They drove back into Asheville at dusk. Lily fell asleep against the window before they reached the city limits. Daniel carried her into Audrey's house and laid her on the long sofa. Audrey rolled in beside the couch with a folded throw across her lap. She tucked it gently around the small body, the way she had seen mothers do in television commercials for 30 years and had never once done herself. Lily sighed in her sleep and turned toward the warmth. Daniel watched her hands work the throw into place. They went out to the terrace. She had a wool blanket on her chair. She unfolded it and pulled the corner around her shoulders and held the other corner out, and he came to sit on the bench beside her, and the blanket went around them both. Her head rested on his shoulder. He did not move. The valley wind came up cold off the mountains, and the lights of Asheville blinked on below the ridge, and they stayed like that for a long time without speaking. 6 months passed. It was the second week of April. The dogwoods on Charlotte Street had opened their white crosses. Daniel had moved most of the workshop's production to a single contract: rehabilitation furniture, low-rise tables, and lever-handled cabinetry and rolling work surfaces, all of North Carolina hardwood. Audrey had been the first customer. She had ordered 40 pieces for the Descent Fund Center, which had opened in Charlotte in February, 2 blocks from the hospital where she had been told, 9 years before, that she would never stand again. Lily was 6. She had decided, somewhere in the fall, that Audrey's name was too long to say properly, and had renamed her Audie. The name had stuck. Audie made pancakes on Saturdays now. Audie came to career day at the elementary school, rolled into the front of the classroom, and told 22 5- and 6-year-olds that you could be a chief executive officer from a chair, and that the chair was not the part of you that mattered. Lily sat in the front row holding Mr. Bumble against her chest and did not blink. Daniel watched from the back. He had not cried in 9 years. He cried, quietly, against the doorframe. That evening, after Lily was in bed in the guest room that had become hers, Daniel and Audrey sat on the terrace. There was a new chair next to hers. He had built it. The arms were curved cherry. It was the only thing in the house that had not been there a year ago. "I signed up for the surgery," Audrey said. "The decompression. Mayo Clinic. This summer." He was quiet for a long time. "It might not work. It might not. It might. Yes." She looked at him. "But this time, the man who reads my prognosis afterward will be a man who once dissented. I want it to be that way." He took her hand. It was the first time he had taken it not to comfort her. "Danielle." "Yes. Whether I walk or not, are you going to stay?" He turned to face her. "Audrey." The name moved across his mouth slowly. He had not said it aloud in the whole arc of the year. "I stood next to the woman I loved once, and I let her go. I'm not going anywhere this time." She leaned in. He met her halfway. The kiss was brief, and not dramatic. The wind moved the dogwood petals across the terrace. A small voice from the doorway. "Audie?" Lily padded out in her pajamas, Mr. Bumble in one hand and a folded sheet of paper in the other. She held the paper up. A crayon drawing. A red cardinal sat on the back of a wheelchair. Beside it, 2 adults were holding hands. Above them, in careful letters, "My family." Mr. Bumble said, "This is our family." Audrey took the paper. The wet came up in her eyes, and this time she let it fall, and it was not for sorrow. The 3 of them stayed on the terrace as the light went down. The Blue Ridge faded into smoke and then into shadow. A real cardinal flew across the rail, landed on a fence post, then flew into the dusk. Some hands are made for healing. Some are made for holding. The rarest are made for both.